Hey losers, I'm Coral. Welcome back to my channel. If you're joining me for the first time, welcome. I mostly read horror, but I really dabble in anything that is dark and wicked. So if you're into that, welcome to the party. Me and Fang Fang are here today. Here's Fang Fang. She doesn't want to face the camera. That's okay. We still love her. We're here today though with the books that I read in the first half of February. I'm filming this a little bit later than halfway. But, you know, I've had a busy time recently. As far as my stats go, for the first half of the month, I read 6 books. 5 of these were off of my TBR. That is excellent. I read 1,837 pages, which is about 108 pages per day. The oldest book I've read so far this month was published in 1993, and the most recent was published in 2025. I read 5 horror books and 1 fantasy. And then I like to keep track of series if I'm picking them up, just because I'm bad about that. So let's see. I got 1 new release this month, which was which catches me up with the series. I continued with 1 series that I've had partially read for years, and I also read a book that concluded a series as far as I'm aware, so that is excellent news. I haven't read so many books that were part of series in 1 month, and I don't even know how long. Let's get into it. I'm gonna start out, oh good. I'm gonna start out with Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros, and I just want to say, mostly because I got a comment on something I said on social media. I simply said, this series does not need to be 5 books. And someone commented on it and said that they're sick of the hate this series is getting, and then they blocked me. So, I mean, like, I don't hate this series, but I think that this is not for me now at this point. So if you're a huge fan of this and cannot handle listening to it be, you know, criticized a little bit, then probably you want to skip forward until I move on to the next book. But if you want to hear me criticize this a little bit, this is Onyx Storm by Rebecca Yarros. This is a new release. It was published this year in, I believe, like the end of January. So I've had this copy. When I got the first book, I enjoyed it. I thought it was a lot of fun. The second book, it was so caught up with relationship drama that it really plummeted in my rankings, you know? Then the third book comes out, and I do like this more than the second, but I think this is where I say I'm not reading any more of this series. You know, I had to evaluate, why am I reading it? Because I didn't like the second book. And I didn't really love the direction the plot was going. And in this one, it does make it a little more interesting as far as the reveals. But anyway, the series is about this young woman named Violet who is in her early 20s. She is going to a military college for dragon riders, and there's a rebellion going on, and the government might have been hiding things, and etc, etc. Like, it's not the plot itself, like the overarching theme of it, not super what am I trying to say? It's not something we've never heard of before. I never really liked the main character, which is that's a big thing. Like, that's a big red flag, I think. And I kind of shoved that red flag down, let some time pass, and then I read the second book, and it just, like I said. So in this third one, I like the reveals better, you know, as far as it's like, oh, that's what's happening, or oh, that's what that means. And the end really gets you, and you're like, oh, I have to know what's going on, which I think is what got me in the second one, is that she does these immense cliffhanger endings, and she really does that with like every chapter. And it's funny because I read, right before I started this, I read The Hitchhiker by RL Stine, and the chapters in these books end in the same kind of thematic way. It's like a Goosebumps book, you know? When you're reading a Goosebumps book or a Point Horror book or a fucking Fear Street book, and it's like, and then they saw a ghost, and it's like the end of the chapter. That's what she writes too. And it's kind of hilarious that when I was thinking about that, I was like, oh my god, this is just like these chapters end like Goosebump books. Yeah, I'm not going to be continuing on with the series. If you loved this, I'm so glad for you, because that means that you have 2 books after this that you get to enjoy. And also, this is not a personal attack on the author or any fans. I've put a lot of time into it at this point, and now I'm like, why did I do that? But I don't know. What can you do, you know? I also read Authority by Jeff VanderMeer. I've read Annihilation twice, and the second time I read it, I was like, okay, it's because I'm gonna pick up the next book soon. And then it's been like, I don't know, 3 to 4 to 5 years since I did that. And I got the most recent book, I can't remember what it's called, but I got that as an ALC copy from Libro FM, I think last month. And so I'm like, you know, I should probably, you know, make this a priority at this point. So I read Authority. I think that the way this turned is really interesting. And I was also concerned because when this was more buzzy, when these books were still coming out, I saw people both say that if you didn't like Annihilation, you will like the second book better. And then I also saw people saying the opposite, that if you didn't like Annihilation, you definitely won't like the rest of the books. So I was like, what do I do? Because I didn't love Annihilation. Even the second time is like, this is an interesting way to tell a story, but it wasn't all that engaging for me. But I read Authority, and I really like the way that this series is going, and I'm really curious, like, is the third book going to pick up on the plot here, or is it going to be something that's obviously in the same world and things like that, like a story touching the other story, almost like Annihilation has these characters and they kind of butt up to what's going on in this book. This is about this man named John, although he goes by Control for most of the book. He is now like the new leader of the team investigating or kind of researching what's going on in Area X, which is this area of the United States that has become just like monstrous. It's like things have evolved strangely, like some sort of catastrophe almost, right? But now the border of Area X is like slowly creeping, and it's taking more and more land with it and making things very weird and bad, and people just can't get a grasp on why and like what and what to do about it and things like that. So they've sent dozens of teams of people into it, but it's like when those people come back, they're always changed, if they come back at all. And so Control is now the leader of whatever fucking research they're trying to do there, but it's like, it's just a feeble attempt. Like there's I don't think people are ever gonna understand what's going on in Area X, but I think that this was really interesting, this part. It's like, instead of being the people inside Area X, like in Annihilation, these are the people on the outside trying to figure out, or even also like more of how the government is reacting to Area X. So I'm really interested in where the third book will go. It's kind of fever dreamy. Then a book I really enjoyed this month, this is Psychic Teenage Bloodbath by Carl John Lee, and this is, as it says, an extreme horror novel. So content warnings, you gotta look them up. This is about a teenage girl named Susan who had sort of like a Carrie moment where she's at a school function and she is bullied and hurt, and she goes into a coma. And now she's been in a coma for a year, and her girlfriend Charlie is visiting her all the time, you know, as much as she can while Susan's been in this coma. And she now is like getting the brunt of this bullying that, you know, was happening to both her and Susan, but now it's like magnified and targeted because she's gay and things like that. People are monstrous to her, but she's hoping that it'll be done soon once they're out of high school. But then a new girl comes to their school. Her name is Lynette, and Charlie really kind of strikes a fancy. Then these really strange things start to happen. People acting abnormally, hurting themselves, things like that. And they soon find out that Susan, in her coma, has gone absolutely bonkers. And she has slowly developed these like telekinesis. She's able to like control people and make them do things, and she wants revenge for what has happened to her. So, I mean, Bloodbath is right. This is very gory. It's got some weird stuff in it. It's a shit show. And I really enjoyed this. I thought it was a lot of fun. One thing that I was kind of rolling my eyes at though is that Charlie and this character Lynette, they meet each other, and it's like on that first day they're like, I love you. And you're like, what? You've literally known each other for one day. And I know they're teenagers and stuff, but I also kind of rolled my eyes about that. But that's really like the one thing I felt nitpicky about. Otherwise, I had such a fun time with this. I flew through it. I couldn't put it down, and I probably would have read it in one sitting if time had allowed, if life and time had allowed. But I really enjoyed that. Okay, and now a book I didn't enjoy so much. This is Red Hands by Christopher Golden. I wouldn't say I didn't enjoy it. I just feel really ambivalent toward it. This is the, as far as I know, the last Ben Walker book. This came out in 2020. And Ben Walker is kind of like a Fox Mulder, like an X-Files guy almost. They call him and they're like, there's something weird going on, Walker. And then he goes and looks into it. And this series starts out with the book Ararat, which was, you know, pretty popular. And that one I really, really enjoyed. But I think the other two, the Pandora Room and Red Hands, just didn't quite do it for me. And this one, there is some sort of strange illness happening and it kills people instantly, but it's like this illness inhabits one person, and when that one person touches other people, those other people die. But this illness is also making the patient zero ill at the same time. So it's very confusing, but it's very frightening because if, you know, patient zero touches anyone, they fucking die. And in the beginning, this young girl named Maeve is infected with it. So she's like the patient zero, and anyone she touches dies. So she like flees to the woods, and Ben Walker has to track her down and figure out what's going on, keep her safe, because while there's people who are frightened by this, there are just as many people who want to get their hands on this patient zero to test them and to see if they can somehow take this power from her and be the patient zero kind of a thing. So I think my biggest thing with this book is that there just didn't feel like there was a ton of depth of character. I didn't feel like I cared about anyone happening here. And when that happens, it loses the ability for you to be upset about the characters, like things that happen to them, or be frightened for them, or just be frightened in general, because who cares what happens? And I think that's just really how I felt about it. Who cares what happens? And and that's it. I will say Chris Golden, you know, he has these really interesting ideas for his books. You know, I'll read the synopsis and I'll be like, oh my god, I've got to read that. But now I've read, where are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of his books. I've read 5 of his books, and I've really only liked one of them. So I think this is where I need to say that he's probably not an author for me and stop buying his books and then stop feeling bad about not liking them. Then we have Hearts Strange and Dreadful by Tim McGregor. This is a 2020 book that takes place in 1821. So we're talking Little House on the Prairie times, baby. And in this we're following a young woman named Hester who is an orphan but lives with her father's brother, so her uncle and her aunt. They've taken her in and they treat her kindly, but you get the feeling that she does a lot of work for them that they don't make their children do, you know? She's almost taken on like a sister wife almost to the mother, but like without anything creepy going on with the uncle or anything like that. But she definitely takes on a lot in this household. And not only that, but she has burns on her face from the fire that killed her parents. So they all just kind of see her almost as like, no one comes out and says it, but this burden that the aunt and the uncle are going to have to take care of for the rest of their lives, because who's gonna want to marry a woman with burns on part of her face? And Hester really feels that. Like, she feels so poorly about the way that she looks, and it's very sad. The main plot of this is that this stranger comes into town and he is very ill, and so they're like kind of spooked by this, the townsfolk, but they also want to know what's going on. So Hester's family nurses him back to health, mostly Hester, and then he tells her that something terrible happened. This terrible sickness ran through a town near them. It's actually the town that Hester grew up in until her parents died. And then this fire started and burned down the entire village. And they're like, what the heck? You know, the people of they're a small village. They want to go see what's going on, see if there's anyone there to help, see if this guy's telling the truth. But at the same time, there is this enigmatic older woman who comes, and she's just very beautiful, refined. She looks like she's not from America, and she blames all of it on this man that Hester's family has been taking care of, so they don't know who to believe. It's very mysterious. And then as this is happening, like, that's not enough to parse out on its own, an illness starts to sweep through Hester's village. It's got some supernatural elements going on. It had a part that was very spooky, and I really, really enjoyed this. I enjoyed Hester a lot, but I will say the ending pissed me off. And I think if you've read this, maybe you know what I mean. It's like, to speak about it really generally, really vaguely, this thing keeps popping up in Hester's life, and you're like, that would not be a good idea. I'm glad that's not happening. And then something with it happens, and you're like, ugh. And then you're like, well, I hope nothing more comes of that. And then more comes of it, and you're like, god damn it, because it's just not, it's not anything Hester deserves, I feel like. And it's just such a bummer that it happened like this. And I just need to tell somebody about it. I told Zach about it, and he's like, oh, you know, but I know he just has no idea what the fuck I'm talking about, and that's okay. But I know some of you have read this, and I'm curious if you felt the same way about the ending. Okay, last book here. We're talking The Hitchhiker by RL Stine. This was published in 1993, and I had such a good time with this. I think, honestly, this is one of the best point horror books I've read so far. In this, we're following Terry and Christina. And Terry and Christina are teenagers taking a road trip over spring break. And on the way back home from Florida, they pick up a boy their age who's a hitchhiker. His name is James. And throughout the book, you're getting this foreshadowing of James doing something wrong. Yeah, you're not really sure. You know, he kind of talks about himself like he's bad. It's not necessarily from someone's POV, but it's like we can hear everyone's thoughts. And James thinks of himself as kind of a bad guy. And you're like, okay, well, is he really a bad guy or not? You don't really know. There's like these other things that the book alludes to, and you're like, well, what's going on with that? Is that something James has done? And you're just not really sure. Everyone seems suspicious, and there's some great red herrings in this, and it's just, honestly, the end of this is so MFing bananas. Like, I can't even, oh my god, it's so great. It's so great. I think that this book, out of all the books I read this month, has the best ending. I just loved it. It was so good. It was so crazy. I'm just gonna keep saying so, but it was really strange and off the wall. It's exactly what I'm looking for when I read a teen horror novel. It was just everything. So those are the books that I have finished so far in February. I'd love to know if you've read any of these, if you have any thoughts you'd like to share on them. I'd love to know what you've gotten up to so far this month. But thank you so much for watching. I will see you all later. Goodbye!